Hello, and welcome back to Veil Noir. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales veiled in noir, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1. I am a priest in a small town, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, where people wave from their porches and bring casseroles when someone is sick. It's a tight-knit community. People like to believe nothing truly bad can happen here. They like to believe we're different. Of course, we have our rougher individuals. Every town does. A man who drinks too much. A couple that shouts in their yard. Teenagers who race their cars down empty roads at night. But nothing that feels evil. Nothing that feels like it belongs in the kind of stories people tell around a fire. By all accounts, we are normal. That's what I told myself for years. That's what I preached without even realizing I was preaching it. That we were safe, that we were held together by routine and faith and the illusion of decency. Then, about a month ago, someone new started coming every Sunday after Mass. He always waited until the crowd thinned, until the families had filed out and the older couples had taken their time walking down the steps and getting into their cars, until the church became quiet again, filled only with the soft noises of cleaning and the last echoes of hymns that wouldn't leave the walls. He asked for confession every time. I will call him he, because I never saw his face. Not once. I only heard his voice through the screen in the confessional booth. It was raspy and worn down, like the voice of a man who had worked construction for decades, breathing dust and shouting over machinery. It had that roughness that comes from a hard life and cheap cigarettes. The first time he came, I didn't think much of it. People drift into churches for all kinds of reasons. Some are sincere. Some are lonely. Some are desperate. Some just want a quiet room where nobody expects anything from them. I was sitting in my side of the booth, waiting, listening to the faint creak of the building settling. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then, the curtain on the other side rattled, opened, and someone stepped in. He sat down and pulled the curtain closed behind him. He didn't speak right away. He just breathed, slow and heavy. It was the kind of breathing that made the booth feel smaller, like the air belonged to him. Even through the partition, I felt warmth build in that tiny space, like his body heat was filling it up. Then he spoke. "Forgive me, Father, for I will sin." I blinked, confused. It sounded like a mistake. People get nervous in confession. They trip over words. They mix up phrases they haven't said since childhood. I went into my usual tone, calm and practiced. "How long has it been since your last confession?" I asked. "Never." That made me pause. Not unheard of, but unusual. Most people in our town grew up in the church. Even the ones who drifted away knew the rhythm of it. "What are your sins?" I asked. Nothing yet. I held my breath for a moment, trying to decide if he was joking, if it was some kind of strange attempt to be clever. I could picture a bored young man daring himself to mess with a priest. But his breathing didn't sound young. It sounded old, heavy, patient. "You can tell me the truth, son," I said. "This is between you, me, and the Lord Almighty." Silence. The quiet stretched long enough that I began to hear my own heartbeat. My fingers tightened around the edge of my side of the booth, and I reminded myself not to let my imagination run wild. The confessional can make people sound like ghosts. The screen can turn an ordinary voice into something more. I tried again, softer. "Whatever you plan on doing, however large or small, a sin is still a sin," I said. "And you wouldn't want God to have an unfavorable judgment when you reach his gates." would you?" His breath slowed, like he was enjoying the time he was taking. Then he said, "Father, how about your sins?" I felt a small jolt go through me. Not fear, not yet, more like irritation, like someone had stepped over a line without permission. "My sins?" I repeated, even though I had heard him clearly. "Will he approve of your sins?" he asked. Before I could answer, the curtain rattled again. He stood and left the booth. The warmth he had brought lingered behind him, trapped in that small space. It felt wrong, like air that had no business being so hot in a church. Stagnant, heavy, as if someone had breathed too close to the walls and left their breath there on purpose. For the next week, I told myself not to think about it, but I did. I thought about it in the quiet moments, when I washed my hands in the rectory sink, when I locked the church doors at night, when I sat with a cup of tea that went cold because I forgot to drink it. His question pressed on something in me that I hadn't touched in years, things I had buried, things people assume priests are immune to, things that, in a different life, might have made me a different man, things anyone would forget if they were allowed to, and things no one should ever forget. Then, Sunday came again. After Mass, when the last parishioners had gone, I sat in the confessional booth and waited. The curtain rattled. He entered like he owned the place. He sat down, shut the curtain. His voice was thicker this time, like he had smoked a pack of cigarettes right outside the church doors before stepping in. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned," I exhaled slowly. The familiar words were almost comforting, like the world had clicked back into place. "What are your sins?" I asked. "I've killed." The word landed in the booth like a stone dropped into water. My first instinct was disbelief. People say strange things in confession. They exaggerate. They confess fantasies. They try to shock. So I chose the path of calm. "Take a breath, son," I said. "God is here. Now tell me, was this an accident?" "No," a simple answer. Flat. No emotion. "Who have you killed?" I asked. "An older lady. She was gardening." My throat tightened. I pictured the community garden behind the church, neat rows of vegetables and flowers, the kind of place older women loved because it gave them something gentle to tend. I wondered if he was describing a real person. I wondered if he was describing someone I knew. "Have you spoken to anyone about this?" I asked. Silence again, but something else filled the space as he sat there. Quiet. A smell. At first it was faint, sharp in the back of my nose. Then it grew stronger, so strong it made my eyes sting. It smelled like garlic, but not the way garlic smells in a kitchen. It was more aggressive, more rotten, like garlic left too long in a damp place until it turned sour. Then the smell shifted into something worse, something that reminded me of rotten eggs. Sulfur. I couldn't see him, but I felt him. I felt as if he were staring straight through the screen, watching my reaction, studying me. It was an awful feeling, being observed while blind. I sat there with my hands folded, trying to hold on to my training, my vows, my sense of order. And behind that, another thought rose. Do I report this? A priest's duty in confession is sacred. But what if he was telling the truth? What if there was a body somewhere? What if he would do it again? I sat in that conflict for nearly a full minute, my mind weighing two terrible choices and finding no good answer. Finally, I cleared my throat, because silence felt like surrender. "As I cannot tell you to turn yourself in, I believe you should," I said carefully. "But I will assign you penance. Volunteer at the community garden. Fast for a week. Reflect upon your actions. Read your scripture more thoroughly. And please, I strongly encourage you to turn yourself in." The man made a sound that was almost a laugh, almost a cough. "Next week, Father?" he asked. Before I could respond, he stood and walked out. The curtain rattled once, then nothing. I remember staring at that curtain afterward, half tempted to pull it aside and look at him. Just a quick glance, just to see his face, to know if he was real, to know if I was speaking to some sick man or a cruel prankster. But I didn't. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself I didn't want to violate the boundary of confession. I told myself a lot of things. The third Sunday came. By then, I had begun to dread the quiet after Mass. I found myself wishing people would linger longer in the pews. I found myself hoping someone would need help with folding bulletins, anything to stretch the time, to delay the moment I would sit in that booth again. But he came, as if he could smell my dread. Curtain. Sit. Quiet breathing. "Good evening, Father," he said. "How was your penance?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have sinned, Father." "We will get to that in a moment," I said. "How was your penance?" A pause. "I've killed a man." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mouth went dry. It was one thing to confess murder once. Twice. It stopped feeling like a twisted joke and started feeling like a pattern. "A sinner," he added. "A gambling man. It's what God would have wanted." The booth fell silent. I had this strange sensation then, like he was leaning close on his side, like his breath was pressing through the thin divide. It almost felt like he was breathing on the back of my neck, even though the wall was there. The wall that was supposed to make this safe. The wall that suddenly felt thin. "God wouldn't approve of his lifestyle," I said, choosing each word slowly. "But that is not a reason to kill someone. Do you see me killing someone for what they believe?" Then I heard myself add, more sharply than I intended, "Do you think God wants that of you?" He didn't answer right away. His silence didn't feel like shame. It felt like patience, like he was letting me speak, because it amused him. Then he stood and left again. As he moved, that sulfur smell clung behind him. It hung in the booth like a stain on fabric, something you couldn't scrub out no matter how hard you tried. That entire week I felt guilty in a way I couldn't explain to anyone. I regretted the way I had handled it. I regretted the fact that I had listened and then tried to correct him like he was simply confused. I regretted, most of all, that I hadn't accepted his confession in full, that I hadn't done the one thing I was supposed to do, guide a sinner back toward grace. I told myself I shouldn't judge. We are all sinners. That is the foundation of everything I preach. But I also knew there was something wrong about him that had nothing to do with human guilt. Then today came, April 26th, 2026. I know the date because I wrote it down afterward with shaking hands, as if writing it could make it less real. He came again. Same time, same routine, the same foul smell, stronger now, filling my nose and throat. His voice sounded the same, nicotine, thick and rough. But there was something different, a weight to his boots. I heard him step into the booth, and the floor creaked under him like it was struggling. He didn't sit immediately. He stood there, quiet, as if he wanted me to feel him looming on the other side. Then he spoke. "Father, it's time for you to confess." I felt my stomach drop. My first thought was anger. Who was he to demand anything of me? But underneath that was fear, quick and sharp, because his voice had changed. There was a second voice beneath his, a guttural undertone that didn't belong to an ordinary man. It sounded like something forcing its way through a human throat, like two sounds sharing the same mouth. "I have seen you kill," he said, for what people believe in. The air in the booth seemed to shift. It went cold so suddenly my skin tightened. It felt like someone had opened a refrigerator and let the cold spill out, except the door was still closed. I sat very still, listening to my own breath and the tiny creaks of wood. You misled your congregation, Father, he continued. My mouth tried to form words. Nothing came out at first. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded smaller than I expected. And how did I do that? I asked. He gave a low chuckle. It made the hairs on my arms rise. Oh, where to start, he said. Then he began listing things, and with every sentence I felt my life narrowing like a noose tightening. Selling them your so-called anointed oils, he said. It led to the death of an old woman, a gardener. Does that sound familiar? My hands clenched in my lap. I could feel my pulse in my wrists. My mind scrambled, trying to deny it, trying to find a way out. But his words landed with the certainty of facts. He wasn't guessing. He continued, his voice calm, like he was reading from a book. Or how about when someone tried to expose you? He said. Misused funds, wasn't it? You killed him. A man by the name of Jared, was it? My chest felt too tight to breathe properly. Who are you? I managed to ask. The air became thick, heavy. It felt like trying to breathe through syrup. Each inhale took effort. Each exhale felt like it didn't fully leave my lungs. He didn't answer my question. Instead, he asked his own, slow and deliberate. Do you repent? My mind went blank for a second, and in that blankness I saw things I hadn't let myself see in years. Faces, moments, choices made in panic and greed, and the belief that I could control consequences. Yes, I said quickly, too quickly. Yes, I confess. I am truly sorry. On the other side of the screen, the man murmured something. I couldn't make out the words. It sounded like a prayer, but not one I recognized. The syllables slid wrong, as if they weren't meant for a human mouth. I lowered my head into my hands. How? I thought. Why now? Then he spoke again, and his voice was steady, final, almost gentle. You are not forgiven. The words hit harder than any accusation. I had spent my life believing forgiveness was always possible if repentance was real. That was the promise. That was the hope you gave people at gravesides and hospital beds. That was what you gave yourself when you couldn't sleep. To hear you are not forgiven in the confessional felt like the floor giving way. I heard him stand. His boots shifted. He stepped out of the booth. A moment passed. Silence. Then the curtain rustled again. Someone else stepped in. A woman's voice, soft and familiar in the way small-town voices are familiar even when you can't place the face. Do you have any more of that oil? She asked. My throat tightened. My son has leukemia, she continued, and there was hope in her voice, the kind that breaks your heart because it's so innocent. I think he's getting better. I heard her smile in the words that followed, like she was sharing good news. You know, she said gently, they always get worse before they get better. Something inside me went still. Not calm, not peace. More like a part of me simply shut down. I didn't answer her. I pushed out of the booth and stepped into the church. The sanctuary was dim and quiet. The candles burned low. The air felt colder than it should have. My feet carried me forward without me deciding to move. On the pew directly in front of me, an open Bible lay as if someone had placed it there just for me. The pages were spread flat. Between the pages was a yellowed substance, thick and smeared into the paper like wax, like grease, like something that had seeped out of a wound. The Bible was open to 2 Corinthians 12:7-10. A thorn in the flesh was given to me. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I reached out. My finger touched the substance. It was sticky, warm, somehow, despite the cold in the room. My hand moved without permission, driven by something I didn't want to admit. I brought my finger to my mouth. The taste hit instantly. Sulfur. I stood there in the silent church with that taste on my tongue, and I understood something I had spent years avoiding. The man hadn't come to confess. He had come to collect. Story 2. I never cared about working out. I used to think exercise was something other people did, the kind of people who already looked good and just wanted to look better. For me, movement was something I kept to a minimum, like saving money. I'd walk when I had to. I'd take the elevator when it was there. I told myself I was just being practical. Then I saw a sign that made me feel, very clearly, that if I didn't change, something inside me was going to end. Not someday. Not in a vague health way. I mean, it felt like a sentence had been handed down, and the only choice I had was whether I was going to fight it or accept it. The sign was neon yellow, simple and loud. Spin class, Tuesday, room 505. It was taped to a dark cinder block wall in the gym hallway, and it stood out the way infected skin stands out against a bruise. The building was dim, painted in tired colors meant to hide sweat stains and age. The sign didn't belong there. It looked new, creamy paper under harsh fluorescent lights, like it had been placed for me to find. I wasn't even a member yet. I'd come in just to look, the way people stroll through a dealership when they're not sure they're ready to buy. I'd made it as far as the locker rooms and the rows of treadmills before I started telling myself I should leave. People were already running, focused, earbuds in, looking like they had somewhere to be. I felt like a stranger in my own body. I was fat. At least I believed I was. Maybe I wasn't massive, but I carried it in a way that made me feel soft all the time. There was this rim of loose skin and tissue around my stomach, like an inner tube you couldn't take off. Sometimes, when I was alone, I'd grab it between my fingers and squeeze hard enough to leave little crescent bruises from my nails, like proof that it was real and not just in my head. Standing in front of that sign, I felt something wake up in me. Not motivation, not exactly. It was more like curiosity mixed with disgust. My hand lifted without me deciding to do it, and for a second I had this urge to touch the paper, to drag my fingertips over it slowly, the way you might touch something you're not sure is safe. My stomach gave a small tremble, almost like it understood what I was thinking. It was as if that soft ring of me knew I was imagining its complete destruction. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the sign. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I went to the front desk and asked for the paperwork. The employees smiled like this was normal, like people didn't join gyms out of panic, like there wasn't a quiet kind of shame behind every new membership. I filled out the forms and left with my heart beating faster than it should have. Tuesday, I showed up early because the sign didn't list the time. That should have been my first clue. But I told myself it was just bad design. I drove through empty streets in the dark and parked under a buzzing lot light that made the pavement look wet even when it wasn't. It was around 6 in the morning when I walked in. The gym felt half asleep, but not empty. There was the distant clank of weights, the hum of machines, the low cough of a treadmill belt. Everything smelled like rubber mats and cleaning solution. I went looking for room 505. That was the next problem. The gym had 3 floors. I knew that because I'd walked through it when I signed up. The rooms, as far as I'd seen, were numbered in the 100s, 200s, and 300s. There wasn't even a hint of a 4th floor, let alone a 5th. Still, I assumed I was missing something. Some wing, some hidden stairwell, some expansion. I walked the top floor in circles, reading the small beige doors with their little windows. Yoga studio, storage, staff only, group training, all of it ordinary. I did this so many times my face started to burn with embarrassment, like anyone watching could tell I didn't belong. I almost left. Then I noticed an elevator in the corner, partly blocked by a wide concrete pillar. I hadn't seen it before. The metal doors looked old and tired, scratched and dull, like they belonged in an apartment building from decades ago, not a renovated gym. One thing was strange right away. The elevator door was already open. Inside stood a man waiting, like he knew I was coming. He was dressed in something that looked like it came from an old home workout tape. Bright colors, tight fabric, a cropped top that showed his stomach, and his stomach was flat in a way that didn't seem human. The muscles weren't just visible. They were carved, like a miniature mountain range. He looked like someone who lived on nothing but discipline and black coffee. But under his bleached hair, his face didn't match the body. His eyes looked tired, sad even, like his expression had been stuck there a long time. He looked at me and spoke in a low voice that cracked at the edges. 505? I stood there for a beat, staring into the elevator box. It smelled like rubbed steel and old oil, like tools left in a garage. I stepped in, nodded, and tried to smile like this was all normal. He didn't touch buttons. There weren't any. He reached to his left and pulled a little lever, and the elevator jerked into motion. We went up. I felt the movement in my stomach, that brief lightness you get when an elevator changes speed, but it lasted longer than it should have. The ceiling of the box rattled. The lights flickered. The man stood still, hands at his sides, facing forward like he was trying not to think. I wanted to ask him where this floor was, how the gym even had a fifth floor, but something about him made me keep quiet. He didn't seem like an employee. He seemed like someone who'd been sent. The doors opened. I expected another dim hallway with beige doors and water fountains. Instead, the elevator opened straight into a huge room that took my breath away. It was an atrium, a wide, open space with a glass vaulted ceiling that filled the entire top like a dome. The sun was rising, and the ceiling pulsed with that early light pale gold shifting into brighter amber. The glass panes were enormous, the size of cars, fitted together with a spidery metal framework that made the whole thing look like a web built to trap the sky. I hadn't seen any of this from the outside. The building didn't look tall enough to hold it. It felt like I'd stepped into a place that shouldn't physically fit in the world I knew. And the floor was filled with spin bikes. Not a few, not even a couple dozen. Rows upon rows, stretching out to the edges of the room, a field of metal frames and heavy flywheels. The bikes were arranged so tightly, it looked less like a class and more like a factory line. People were already riding. They were everywhere, but not evenly spread out. They occupied pockets around the room like cliques in a cafeteria, each little cluster of riders moving together, their bodies bobbing in rhythm. The sound of it was constant. Breath, chain mechanisms, shoes strapped in, the dull hum of wheels cutting through air. They weren't going anywhere. They were drenched in sweat, red-faced, half-naked or barely covered, eyes locked on nothing. They pushed and didn't move an inch forward or back. It was work without progress, effort without travel, like punishment made to look like fitness. A voice boomed across the room, so loud it felt like it came from the ceiling itself. "Hey, get yourself on a bike." I flinched and looked around to find the source. At the very front was a person riding on a bike, raised slightly above the others. From far away, they looked small, swallowed by the sea of moving bodies. Their outfit was tight, like the man in the elevator. Bright, clinging. Their hair was long and straight, moving around their head like a living thing, trembling and pulsing like a halo made of wires. The more I stared, the less sure I was what I was looking at. Man or woman, young or old. The voice was strong, but the face was too far to read. "You hear me?" The voice shouted again. I felt myself blush like a kid caught in the wrong classroom. I walked down an aisle between bikes and climbed onto the first empty one I found. The seat was hard. The handles were damp. Someone had been here recently. The straps were cold against my shoes as I slid my feet in and tightened them. I started pedaling. The pain came fast. My muscles weren't just weak, they were unused, like they'd been sleeping for years. I worked a desk job. My body's main tasks were walking to meetings, walking to the fridge, walking to my car. That was it. My legs protested with a deep pull in the tendons, the tight stretching ache that feels like you're ripping something that isn't meant to be ripped. It was the beginning of damage. But I kept going because I told myself this was the point. This was how it started. You suffer a little, then you get better. To my left, a woman was riding. She was gasping in short, controlled huffs, like she'd learned how to breathe around pain. She glanced at me, nodded once, and kept her eyes forward. I nodded back, grateful for any hint of friendliness. Her workout clothes were strangely baggy, like they didn't fit her. Her top slid off one shoulder sometimes as she rode. I forced my eyes away because I didn't want to seem like the kind of man who stared. The first 15 minutes weren't as bad as I expected. After the initial shock, my legs found a rhythm. Something in my brain softened. The endorphins kicked in the way people always talk about. For the first time in a long time, I felt present in my body. I leaned a little toward the woman and spoke between breaths. "I'm Tommy." She answered so quietly I almost missed it. "Grace, when did the class start?" I asked. The poster didn't say. Her eyes stayed forward. It doesn't what?" "Start," she said. "We do this day and night." I laughed a little because I thought she was joking, but it came out thin and wrong. Her face didn't change. I went back to pedaling, trying to process what she'd said. A never-ending spin class didn't make sense. It sounded like one of those extreme endurance things people did for charity, except there was no charity sign, no cheering, no finish line. As my legs started to sting again, another question pushed itself out of me. "So do we just leave when we're done?" Grace didn't respond. She pressed harder, like the question had embarrassed her. I tried to match her pace and felt the resistance bite into my thighs. Up front, the instructor voice came on again every so often. "There's a hill ahead. Get your glutes ready. All right, let's cool down for 5. You're all rock stars, you know that? Let's get that burn in." The lines were cheerful, the kind of things you hear in any class, but something about them annoyed me because they didn't lead anywhere. The voice never said, "Great job, that's it." It never said, "Class is over." It was like a loop designed to keep you moving, not teach you anything. An hour passed, then another. My stomach started to tug with each breath, the soft inner tube pulling at my abs. I hated that feeling. I pedaled faster, trying to punish it. Grace snapped her head toward me, fear flashing cold and sharp in her eyes. "Slow down," she said. "What?" "I'm just pushing myself." "Don't go hard unless Jess tells you to," she said, and the way she said the name made my skin tighten. She opened her mouth like she wanted to explain, but she got stuck in a gasp and turned forward again. I looked around the room to distract myself from the burn. Most of the riders were young, smooth arms, full hair, bodies that looked built for effort. But scattered among them were older people, and they didn't look like the older folks you see at normal gyms. Their clothes were falling apart. Shirts and shorts split at seams. Bras hung in shredded straps. One man was almost naked, a ruined pair of underwear the only thing covering him. And all of them were thin, not fit thin, not athletic, bone thin, skin loose and fluttering as they rode. Their faces looked sharp, pulled tight over cheekbones, eyes bright in a way that didn't feel healthy. They pedaled like cornered animals, By hour 2, I was sweating so much my eyes burned. My hands were slick on the handles. I tried to tell myself it was just a hard class, that I'd underestimated it, that I could stop any time. That thought lasted until I tried to stop. I decided I'd done enough. I planned my reward in my head as motivation. McDonald's breakfast. A sausage biscuit. A Sprite. I could taste it already. Cold carbonation cutting through the heat in my throat. I slowed my legs. But they didn't slow. I tried again, consciously, pressing less, letting my knees relax, telling my body to ease up. My legs kept pumping. The pedals kept turning. I flexed my feet against the straps, trying to pull them free. The straps clung tighter, like they'd cinched down on their own. My shoes might as well have been bolted to the pedals. My legs moved as if they had their own instructions, as if they knew what I was trying to do and were working harder to prevent it. Overhead, the instructor voice boomed again. "Keep it up, people. Keep it up." It sounded like an order, not encouragement. Hour 3 passed. Then 4. Then 5. The sun rose higher. Heat poured through the glass ceiling and burned my shoulders. Sweat stung my skin and made my shirt stick to me like glue. My head went light and strange. My arms felt weak, like they might slip off the handlebars if I loosened my grip. A tap touched my arm. Light plastic. Grace held out a purple water bottle. I stared at it like it was a miracle. I'd forgotten to bring water. I took it with shaking hands and drank too fast, throat working painfully. The water didn't taste fresh. It tasted like warm plastic in someone else's mouth, but I didn't care. I swallowed until my stomach cramped. I handed it back. "Thank you. I needed that." "When do we get a break?" "When Jess decides," Grace said, nodding toward the front. She passed the bottle back over her shoulder to a teenager behind her, a skinny kid with shaggy hair and trembling arms. "Thanks, Chuck." Chuck nodded like this was normal and passed the bottle further down the line. "Why did you do that?" I asked, already feeling my mouth drying again. "Gotta fill it up. Why can't you just step off and do it?" Grace looked at me like I'd asked why we couldn't just stop gravity. She didn't answer, but her eyes said enough. I understood, but I didn't want to say it out loud. Saying it would make it real. I kept riding as the sun moved across the sky. When it dropped toward the horizon, the whole room slowly dimmed. Night came, and the atrium turned into a dark bowl with glass overhead. City light or moonlight should have shone through, but it didn't. The ceiling became a black mirror. We pedaled through the night. The worst part was that I wasn't sleepy. I was exhausted, every muscle screaming, but my eyes didn't feel like closing. My body never gave me that mercy. It frightened me more than the pain. I started to feel like I wasn't fully inside myself, like the pedaling had taken over the part of me that chose things. At some point, I pushed harder, not because I wanted to, but because panic made me move. Grace tapped me again with the bottle, and we shared small sips until it was empty, then passed it down the line again and waited for it to return. That was the routine. Days blurred, then weeks. I stopped asking when we could leave because the answers weren't answers. The class didn't end. People didn't come in with gym bags and then walk back out. People arrived. People rode. People changed. The first person who fell off their bike I didn't see clearly. It happened at night. There was a crash, a sound of metal and body, and then murmurs a few aisles away. No one screamed. No one ran to help like in a normal gym. The pedaling didn't stop. It never stopped. In the morning, 3 gym employees arrived wearing white coats and white pants. They moved like hospital workers, calm and practiced. They lifted what looked like a pile of skin and bones from the floor, not a person in any normal sense, more like something that had been used up. They carried it through a pair of double doors at the back of the room. By then, I had been pedaling for a month. The soft ring of fat around my stomach was gone. Not toned, not burned off in a healthy way, gone, like something eaten. We lived on protein pouches, passed along the rows in water from the purple bottle. I leaned toward Grace and spoke quietly. "What's behind those doors?" She didn't know. Or she didn't want to say. With nothing else to do, we talked when our breath allowed it. Grace told me she used to work in finance. She'd struggled with her weight her whole life. She'd seen the sign and thought she could lose 20 pounds with a spin class. She guessed she'd lost twice that now, maybe more. She said it like it was a strange joke. Then her eyes went flat because there was no scale, no mirror that told the truth. Just the feeling of her body shrinking while she stayed. Trapped. Chuck was the talker. He'd come because he wanted to get muscular and hadn't realized cycling wasn't going to give him what he imagined. He'd already been skinny before. Now he was disappearing. His arms shook constantly, but he kept his voice bright. He quoted entire movies. He did impressions of characters with ridiculous accuracy, making Grace and me laugh when laughter felt impossible. 3 months in, Chuck finally folded. One moment he was pedaling and talking. The next his body tipped sideways and slid down to the floor like his bones had turned to sand. The white coats came for him later, like they'd been waiting for a certain number to fall before they bothered. Grace and I kept going, quieter now. Surviving got harder after Chuck because he'd been our link in the water chain. The only way to refill the bottle was to pass it down the line until it reached someone near the fountain, then pass it back. There were rumors that Jess had called for an official water break once, years ago, but I didn't believe them. If a break had ever been real, the room would have felt different. It didn't. It felt designed around the idea that you never stopped. We had to get the purple bottle to the rider behind Chuck. His name was Leon. He was about 50 and looked like the kind of man who used to brag about being a health nut. He was still strong enough to catch throws. Grace and I started tossing the bottle carefully, timing it between our movements, praying it wouldn't hit a wheel or bounce wrong. We became stingy with water. We learned how long we could make a bottle last. 1 day if we were careful, 2 if we were desperate. When thirst got sharp enough, my thoughts turned stupid and mean. All I could think about was my tongue sticking to my teeth, my throat shrinking, the salt crust on my lips. But there was something almost beautiful about the bottle when it flew. It would arc over spinning wheels, catching a slice of sunlight through the glass ceiling, glittering for a second like a tiny moving jewel. Every time, my heart stopped waiting to see if it would fall and roll away forever. Then Grace's hand would snap out and catch it, fast and sure, like a bird grabbing prey. We'd take a sip and feel like we'd won something. Then, one day, she missed. The bottle hit the floor with a hollow clatter and rolled just a few feet away. 3 feet, maybe less. Close enough to see. Close enough to smell the water inside through the plastic, but too far to reach without stopping. We reached anyway, stretching until our shoulders felt like they were tearing. Our fingers brushed air. We couldn't lean far enough. The pedals kept turning under us. Relentless. "Shit," I whispered, voice dry and small. I waited for Jess to call for a cool down, for anything that would let us risk a deeper reach. Grace didn't even look at the front. She already knew. The bottle sat there and wobbled slightly with the vibration of the floor. Water sloshed inside, mocking us. It had been a year since I arrived. By then, the room felt smaller, even though it was huge. It felt like a world that had eaten every other world. Grace and I were in a pocket of riders where the nearest people were too far to help. Leon was far away now, and even if we could get his attention, he couldn't risk his own bottle for us. So we kept pedaling. What else could we do? On the second day without water, Grace turned her head toward me. Her eyes looked too bright, too dry, like glass. Her lips were cracked. When she spoke, her voice rasped out like it hurt. "I'm going to die, Tom." "Don't say that," I said. I tried to think of a plan, any plan, but my brain was thick and slow. "Maybe I can." "Tom." "No." She swallowed with effort. "I'm going to die." My own throat tightened. The inside of my mouth felt like sandpaper. When I swallowed, it was like two dry surfaces tearing away from each other. "We can hold on," I said, even though I didn't know what I meant. "Just a bit longer." She stared forward, then said very quietly, "When I do, don't let me be alone." I didn't answer because anything I said would have been a lie. The truth was, none of us were alone in that room, but we were all alone anyway. Night fell. The room went dark again. I could barely see Grace's outline. Thirst made everything unreal. I felt my hands trembling on the handlebars, fingers stiff. Then I felt her reaching toward me. Fingers waved uncertainly in the dark, and her dry skin brushed mine. I leaned out as far as I could and caught her hand. Our grip was awkward because of the way our bodies had to stay balanced on the bikes, but we held on. We kept pedaling while our hands stayed clasped, like we were afraid the motion would shake us apart. Our bobbing rhythms slowly synced. Sometime after midnight, her grip weakened. I felt her fingers slip, one by one, like letting go of a rope. I tightened my hold, but there was nothing to hold on to. In another moment, I was grasping air. Jess's voice boomed through the speakers. Another hill. "Get those legs moving." In the morning, the whitecoats came for Grace. I couldn't bear to look directly at what they carried. I stared at the purple bottle on the floor, still just out of reach. I hated it with a hot, stupid rage. I wanted to smash it, to stomp it until it turned into a puddle and shards, as if ruining it would undo what it had failed to do. On the third day, I stopped expecting help. I waited to die. I waited for my body to finally droop, for my legs to stop, for the pedal momentum to throw me off the seat and onto the floor like it had done to Chuck. I imagined Grace beside me again. I imagined Chuck, too, riding and laughing, doing his stupid impressions, making the dead air feel human. I could almost hear him doing Borat again, the same lines, the same goofy voice, like comedy could keep us alive. My lungs felt heavy. My bones felt like they were cracking with each push. My mouth was pure sand. I leaned forward onto the bars, head hanging, sweat drying into salt. Then I felt it. A tap on my shoulder. Plastic. Light. I lifted my head. Jess was standing beside me, off the bike. Up close, the instructor didn't look like a normal person. The outfit was the same tight thing, but the body underneath it seemed too preserved, too controlled. The hair hung straight and perfect. The face looked smooth in a way that made it hard to guess an age. The eyes were calm, almost gentle. Jess held something out to me. The purple bottle. His voice, for the first time, wasn't coming through speakers. Without amplification, it was soft, intimate, almost kind. "You dropped this," Jess said. My hand shook so badly I could barely take it. The bottle felt heavy, like it contained more than water. Jess leaned down and kissed my cheek. The touch was quick, almost affectionate, and it made my stomach turn. Then Jess walked away as if nothing happened and climbed back onto the bike at the front. My body acted before my mind could decide whether this was a gift or a trick. I twisted the cap off and drank everything inside like I was pouring life back into myself. I didn't sip. I swallowed until my throat burned, until my stomach swelled and cramped. I threw the bottle to Leon for refills twice, taking risks that should have gotten me killed. I drank until I vomited water. The humiliation didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the relief of wetness. Then I shoved the bottle into my cup holder and sobbed. Then I drank again. It's been 5 years now. I don't understand how I'm still here. I don't understand why my legs still move. People come and people disappear. New faces arrive with the same nervous energy I had, the same hope that this is just a hard class they can quit. I talk to them when I can. I tell them not to pedal too hard, not unless Jess tells them. Sometimes they listen. Sometimes they look at me like I'm crazy. I share the bottle when I can. A few people accept it with shaking gratitude. Most refuse at first, proud or confused, not understanding what thirst will do to them. No one lasts long. At night, when the room goes dark and the ceiling becomes black, I think about Grace. I remember the feel of her fingers in my hand. I try to picture her face from before her eyes turned bright and dry. Sometimes I swear I can feel her grip again, like she's still reaching through the motion. Last week, I finally got my phone charged. It had been at 10% when I arrived, and the battery died early on, long before I understood what this place was. I don't know why it took so long to get it charged again. Maybe I forgot I had it. Maybe I didn't want to know what the outside world was doing without me. There's Wi-Fi up here. It's strong. That part is almost funny. The signal is perfect in a room that doesn't let you leave. No one ever comes for anyone. To people on the outside, it's like we never disappeared, like our lives kept going without our bodies. I opened my messages and found cheerful updates from my mom, year after year, talking about how much she loved seeing me at Christmas, asking if I wanted the same gifts, sending photos, writing like I was sitting on her couch smiling. I don't know how to explain that. I don't know if I even want to. So I started writing instead, because writing is something my hands can do while my legs keep moving. It makes time feel less like a wall. And recently I realized something that changed the way I see this place. It happened while Jess was calling out one of those stupid lines. Something like pedal down, or keep it tight. I don't remember the exact words. What I remember is what was underneath them. The tone, the certainty. Like the voice wasn't trying to inspire us. It was reminding us of the rule. I will die here. I've always known it in a distant way, like a fact you don't stare at. I knew I'd keep pedaling until my skin wrinkled and my hair turned gray. I knew my muscles would wear down until there was nothing left to burn. I knew I would fall, and the white coats would come, calm and efficient, and drag me through the double doors to whatever waits back there. But this time, I didn't just know it. I felt it. I believed it with my whole body, like belief had finally sunk into my bones. And right after that, I pedaled harder. Not out of panic, not out of desperation, like I had somewhere to be. Now, when Jess talks about hills and climbs, I let myself go there. I'm not in the room anymore. Not really. In my mind, I'm in mountains, riding over green rolling slopes where the air is cold and clean. There are trees that look alive in a way the gym's plants never could. There's running water so fresh you could lower your face into it and drink without fear. I know where I'm going. Grace will be there. Chuck, too. All the others who went ahead of me, not as piles carried through doors, but as people whole again, laughing and breathing and free. For the first time, the burn feels sweet. For the first time, it feels like motion might finally mean something. Story 3. Sunday school was the first place I ever felt safe. When I was little, it was simple. You walked into a bright room that smelled like crayons and old carpet. You sat in a circle. You sang songs you barely understood. You colored pictures of animals on an arc and listened to adults speak in gentle voices about kindness and forgiveness. In my memory, nothing bad could touch you in that building. The church was where you went when you wanted the world to stop for a while. Even after everything else in life got complicated, that feeling stayed. So when I was older, a teenager, and they asked if I wanted to help teach, I said yes without thinking. It felt like a way to go back to something clean. something sure, a place that had rules, a place where adults smiled and called you sweetheart and acted like the worst thing that could happen was spilled juice. I didn't realize the safety I remembered had never been real. I didn't realize there were parts of that building that weren't meant for children, and maybe weren't meant for anyone at all. I didn't realize there was a room no one talked about, a door that wasn't on any plan, wasn't in any hallway, didn't even feel like it belonged to the church. The strange part is that the first sign wasn't a sound or a shadow. It was air. Our church was old enough to have quirks. Pipes groaned. Doors stuck in winter. The heating always ran too hot or too cold, like it had its own opinions. People joked about it. When you grow up around a building like that, you stop noticing. But one Sunday, while I was putting away books in the little church library, I felt a draft. Not the normal kind that sneaks under a door. This was colder, sharper. Like the building, it exhaled straight onto the back of my neck. I turned around slowly and stood still, trying to locate it. It was coming from behind a section of wall where the shelves were built in. The paneling there looked slightly warped, just enough that I would have missed it if the cold hadn't hit me first. The wood seemed off, not damaged exactly. More like it had been handled too many times, pressed and pulled and forced back into place. I leaned in and ran my fingers along the seam where two panels met. There was the faintest line, too straight to be natural, like a door had once been there and someone had tried to erase it. I told myself it was nothing. Old buildings settle, wood warps. Libraries are quiet, so every little sensation feels bigger than it is. Still, I tapped the wall with my knuckles. Then I knocked harder, listening for a hollow sound. It sounded solid. I pushed on it. Nothing moved. I looked around, half expecting someone to be watching me, but the library was empty. Only the hum of fluorescent lights and that cold air brushing my skin like a warning. That night I tried to forget about it. I went to bed like normal. I scrolled on my phone. I let myself get sleepy. And then I dreamed of the room. In the dream, I was back in the church library, standing in the same spot, with the same shelves, the same quiet. Only the air was colder, and the light felt wrong, as if it was coming from a source that wasn't in the ceiling. The wall panel wasn't warped anymore. It had a clear outline, and a handle that hadn't been there in real life. Before I could decide whether to touch it, the door swung open on its own, slow and heavy, like it had been waiting for a long time to do that. A faint glow leaked out from the gap, not bright like a lamp, more like something pale and alive. It didn't light the room so much as it invited my eyes to follow it. Then I heard voices, children singing. It was a sound I knew well, Sunday school songs, the kind with clapping and easy words. Except in the dream, the voices were stretched and crooked, like the song had been recorded on a tape and left to melt in the sun. Familiar, but wrong. Sweet, but rotten around the edges. Under the singing there were whispers too, soft words layered under each other. Too many to separate, like a crowd talking in a dark theater. I woke up drenched in sweat. My heart was racing so hard it made my ribs ache. The room in my house looked normal. My phone still sat on the nightstand. The ceiling fan spun quietly. Nothing had followed me. I told myself it was just a dream, my brain chewing on a weird little detail from the day. Stress does that. Curiosity does that. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the dream hadn't come from me. It felt more like an announcement. The next afternoon, curiosity won. Not the fun kind of curiosity, the kind you have as a kid. This was heavier, like a hook in my chest, pulling me toward the thing I should have avoided. I went back to the church after hours. I knew the building well enough to get in without attracting attention. There was always a side door that didn't latch right if you lifted it at a certain angle. People had complained about it for years. No one ever fixed it. At the time, it felt like luck. Now, looking back, it feels like the church wanted me inside without making me break anything. The hallways were dim and quiet. Without people, the building sounded different, like the silence had depth. My footsteps echoed too loudly. The air smelled like old hymnals and floor polish. I walked straight to the library. The moment I stepped in, I felt the draft again. It was waiting exactly where it had been before. Cold air slipping through the wall like breath through teeth. My skin tightened. The hair on my arms rose. I went to the warped panel and put my palms against it. This time, when I pushed, the wood gave way with a soft groan. Not a loud creak, not a dramatic snap, more like a tired sigh. The panel swung inward and revealed a narrow staircase leading down. I stood there for a long time, staring into the darkness. I told myself I would just look. I wouldn't go down. I would prove to myself it was some old storage space, and then close it and never think about it again. Then I took a step forward anyway. The air beyond the panel smelled damp and metallic, like cold coins. Under that was another smell, faint but distinct. The way you can smell old wax when candles have been burned too long and the smoke has seeped into the walls. As my foot hit the first step, something lit up. Candles. One by one along the staircase, little flames appeared as if an invisible hand had touched wicks that were already waiting. The light was warm but weak, and the flicker didn't behave like normal candlelight. It pulsed in a rhythm that felt too close to my heartbeat, like the flames were sinking themselves to me. I began to descend. The staircase was narrow enough that the walls nearly brushed my shoulders. The stone felt wet in places. The temperature dropped with every step. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I was leaving the church behind and entering something that had been buried under it. The shadows moved in ways that made no sense. At first I thought it was just the candlelight dancing. But then I realized the shadows weren't following the flames. They were sliding against them, like black ink flowing uphill, like something alive trying to stay out of the light, but also trying to surround it. I reached the bottom, and the staircase opened into a wide basement. The room was much larger than the church could reasonably hold. That was the first thing that hit me. The space didn't match the building above. It felt like the room was folded under the church, or stitched to it from somewhere else. Then I saw what filled it. Dolls. Rows and rows of dolls suspended from the ceiling by thin strings. Some were small, some were almost life-sized. They hung at different heights so you couldn't walk straight without weaving between them. Their bodies turned slightly in the air as if they were drifting underwater. Each doll had a card pinned to its chest, a name written neatly in dark ink. I stepped closer, and my stomach dropped as I began to read them. They weren't random names. They were names I knew. Kids from Sunday school, friends from elementary school, a neighbor's little brother, a cousin, a girl I'd sat next to in church every Christmas, names from my own family, written as casually as labels on storage boxes. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight. My mouth tasted like pennies. The doll's eyes looked too real. Not glassy, not painted in the cheerful way toys usually are. They had depth, a wet shine that made them seem awake. I stared at one doll's face, forcing myself to look closely so I could prove it was normal, prove I was imagining things. It didn't blink while I watched it. But when I looked away and glanced back, its eyes were in a slightly different position, as if it had been tracking me. A whisper brushed my ear. I spun around, but there was no one behind me. only the hanging dolls and the slow drift of their bodies. Then another whisper came, this time more clearly. My name. Not spoken aloud like someone calling across a room. It was softer, closer, like someone breathing it into my thoughts. The whispering grew. Soon it wasn't one voice. It was many, layered, overlapping, sliding into each other like a choir trying to speak instead of sing. I couldn't catch all the words, but I understood the feeling of them. They knew me. They knew the parts of me I never said out loud. They began listing things, little moments I hadn't thought about in years. The time I lied about breaking something and let someone else take the blame. The time I laughed when a kid got embarrassed. The ugly thoughts I had and immediately buried. The small cruelties that felt harmless because I was young. Every secret I'd convinced myself didn't matter. The air hummed, low and constant, like a machine running under the floor. The vibration traveled into my teeth, into my jaw, into my ribs. It felt like the room had a voice even when it wasn't speaking. As I stood there shaking, I noticed movement between the rows of dolls. Shadows. Not normal shadows cast by candles. These were thin, dark shapes moving on their own, weaving between the hanging bodies. They twisted and crawled along the floor and then climbed upward, coiling around the strings like vines. They slid around the dolls as if they were checking each one, tasting them, counting them. And they kept whispering, always whispering. They repeated my childhood mistakes with a kind of patient cruelty, like they weren't angry, just certain, like judgment wasn't a feeling to them, but a job. I backed up, ready to turn and run. Only then did I realize something even worse. The staircase was gone. The opening I'd come through had vanished, as if it had never existed. There was only smooth stone wall where the stairs should have been, damp and slightly curved, like the inside of a throat. My breath came fast. I pushed at the stone with both hands. It didn't give. I ran my fingers along it, searching for seams, cracks, anything. Nothing. The wall pulsed faintly beneath my palms, not like a vibration from pipes, like a living pulse, slow and steady, as if the room was breathing. The whispering shifted. It became louder, more organized, less like random voices and more like chanting. The shadows between the dolls thickened, gathering together, stretching upward. They formed shapes that looked almost human. Long limbs, narrow torsos, heads tilted at impossible angles. But there were no faces, no eyes, no mouths, just smooth darkness shaped like people. Even without features, I felt their attention lock onto me. They began circling. The space around me bent in ways my brain couldn't handle. The figures would be far away one moment and then close the next without crossing the distance between. I tried to track them, but my eyes couldn't follow. It was like watching something move in the corner of your vision, except it was happening right in front of me. I dropped to my knees. I didn't choose to. My legs simply gave out. I started praying out loud, words spilling from me in panic. I begged for forgiveness. I promised I'd never come back. I promised I'd be better. I begged God to pull me out of there like a parent yanking a child away from danger. But the room didn't answer like a holy place. It answered like something amused. Not with a clear laugh you could point to, but with a soundless reaction that still shook me. The air itself seemed to ripple with mockery, vibrating in my chest, making my lungs tremble as if the room had found my prayers funny. Time stopped behaving. I couldn't tell whether I was there for hours or days. My throat grew raw. My knees hurt. My thoughts began to slip, like the room was wearing down the edges of my mind. The whispers changed too. At first they focused on the past, on things I had done. Then they started whispering about things I hadn't done yet. They spoke in the same confident tone, describing future moments like they were reading from a list. Things I feared I might become, mistakes I worried I might make, horrible choices I couldn't even picture myself doing, except now the whispers made them feel close, possible, inevitable. It was like the room wasn't just judging me, it was shaping me. Around me, the dolls began to twitch. At first it was small, a jerk of a wrist, a slight kick of a dangling foot. I told myself it was air movement, or my imagination trying to find patterns in fear. Then the twitching spread. Heads turned, fingers curled. Fabric strained like something inside was pulling at it. The dolls' faces started to change. Their features warped into expressions of accusation, fear, open-mouthed, silent screams. The lifelike eyes looked even more alive, wet and desperate, like they were trying to communicate through the glass. And in that moment, I understood something I didn't want to understand. The dolls were not just dolls. They were containers, vessels. Each one held a fragment of someone, some piece of soul or memory or something I didn't have the words for. The labels weren't decorations. They were inventory, a record, proof. And I wasn't just trespassing in a secret room. I had walked into a ritual that never fully ended. I tried to crawl away, low to the ground, pushing myself through the hanging forest of legs and arms. But no matter which direction I went, I ended up back in the center of the room, like the floor was tilting me toward the same spot. It didn't matter how hard I fought it. Space itself refused to let me leave. The whispering grew so constant it started to blend with my own thoughts. I would try to think a sentence, and the room would finish it for me. I would try to remember my mother's voice, and the whispers would mimic it. I would try to picture sunlight, and shadows would slide across the image like oil. At some point, I realized the worst thing. The room was alive, not metaphorically, not like this place feels haunted. Alive, the way an animal is alive. A patient predator that didn't need to chase, because it had all the time in the world. It had been under that church for decades, maybe longer, waiting for the right kind of person to find the seam in the wall. Someone curious, someone nostalgic, someone who still believed the building was safe. I don't know how long I stayed there before I broke. Eventually, I stopped fighting and just closed my eyes. I prayed silently then, not because I thought I deserved saving, but because it was the only thing that still felt like mine. The only part of myself the room hadn't spoken over yet. I don't know what I expected. Light, warmth, a voice from above. What I got was quiet. When I opened my eyes, I was outside the church. I was kneeling on the cold stone steps at the front entrance, like someone had placed me there carefully. The sky was turning pale. The sun was rising, painting the building in warm gold and soft pink, making it look normal and harmless, the way it looked in every brochure and every wedding photo. Birds chirped. A car passed in the distance. The world acted like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I stood up slowly, my body aching in strange places, like I'd been held in one position too long. My clothes smelled faintly of damp stone and old wax. My mouth tasted metallic. I looked at the church doors, solid, plain, locked, and felt a sudden wave of nausea. Because it wasn't over. I hadn't escaped. I'd been released. That's the word that keeps coming back to me. Released like you let a fish go after catching it. Not because you're kind, but because you know you can catch it again. Or because you want it to swim back and tell the others the water is safe. At night, I hear the whispers again sometimes. Not as loud as in the room, but enough to make my skin go cold. I'll be half asleep and hear my name spoken softly, like someone standing just out of sight. I'll wake up sweating, my heart racing, and I'll stare into the corners of my bedroom. Sometimes the shadows there look a little too dark. Sometimes I dream of dolls swinging gently from a ceiling that doesn't exist in any building plan. I dream of names written in careful black ink. I dream of children singing, stretched and wrong, like a hymn played backward. Every creak in my house makes me flinch. Every gust of wind feels like that draft in the library. Every time I pass a church, I feel my stomach tighten, because I know how easy it is for a holy place to have something buried under it. The room is still there. I'm sure of it. It's patient. It knows I'm afraid. It knows I walk around pretending I'm fine. It knows I tell myself it was stress, or a vivid nightmare, or a panic episode. It knows I want to believe in safety, because that's what people like me need. But the shadows are eternal, and the dolls remember. And one day, whether it's me or someone else, some curious kid, some volunteer, some person staying late to pray, the seam in the wall will be found again. The panel will sigh open. The candles will light. The whispers will start their song. And that hidden room will do what it has always done. Wait. Feed. Keep count. And if you're reading this because you love your church the way I used to, because you think of Sunday school as a place of laughter and songs, I want you to understand one thing. Some doors don't exist until you dream of them. Some rooms don't care whether you believe in them. And once a place like that learns your name, it never really forgets it. Story 4. You want to know the one good thing about not being able to sleep? There's always time to make a fresh, hot cup of coffee. For me, it has to be a dark roast, ground fresh. Not pre-ground, not stale, not some cheap instant stuff that tastes like burned dust and regret. I mean the real thing. You take the beans and grind them to a medium texture, fine enough to pull out the flavor, coarse enough to keep it clean. You pour the grounds into a French press. You heat the water to about 198 degrees. Not boiling, not lukewarm, right in that sweet spot. You pour just enough water to cover the grounds, a little above them, and you let it bloom for 5 minutes. That bloom is everything. It's like the coffee is waking up, like it's breathing. Then you add the rest of the water, let it sit, press it down slow, and what comes out is liquid heaven in a mug. It's the closest thing to comfort I'd had in a long time. A small, perfect ritual that still belonged to me. It seemed my unexpected guest agreed, because he didn't show up until the coffee was ready. I call him Unexpected, because I never thought I'd see a personification of my intent sitting at my table, waiting like he had all the time in the world. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My life had taken a hard turn downhill, and it didn't feel like there was any bottom. I won't bore you with every detail, because the story is probably familiar. I lost my job due to downsizing. That was the official word, the corporate way of saying you're not needed anymore. After that, everything else followed like dominoes. Savings drained. Calls went unanswered. Friends stopped checking in. Bills stacked up. The future turned into something I couldn't picture without feeling sick. Eventually, I ended up in a one-bedroom apartment that felt more like a waiting room than a home. The only thing I had to look forward to was drinking coffee alone at a plastic table from Walmart, the kind that wobbles if you rest your elbows on it. That was the point where I decided I needed to get my affairs in order. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't write some dramatic note. It was just a quiet decision that slid into place in my mind like it belonged there. I was tired of feeling like I was being dragged behind my own life. I was tired of waking up and realizing I still had to do another day. So I planned it. I planned my last day like it was something I could control, like if I did it right, then it wouldn't hurt so much. And I told myself My last day was going to be the best day I'd had in almost a year. It would start with coffee made exactly the way I liked it. No penny pinching, no settling, no cheap replacements. I wanted one final thing to be done properly. It was another sleepless night when I decided today was the day. I laid in bed staring at the clock as it crawled closer to 4 in the morning. There's something humiliating about that kind of time, when the world is silent and you're still awake, when your thoughts keep circling like they can't find a place to land. The clock didn't feel like it was measuring time. It felt like it was counting down. Then, all at once, I jolted up, like my brain had already decided to begin the day and my body was just slow to follow orders. I got tangled in my sheets, twisted at a bad angle, and fell out of bed. It wasn't graceful. It was heavy and awkward. I hit the floor hard enough to make the room shake, but strangely, it didn't hurt as much as I expected. It startled me more than anything. The kind of shock that wakes you up instantly, snaps your mind and body onto the same track. I lay there for a second, staring at the ceiling, feeling my heart thumping. Then I pushed myself up, stood, and walked to the kitchen. I remember thinking about how quiet everything was. No traffic outside. No voices through the walls. No music. Just the hum of the fridge and the soft sound of my own footsteps on cheap flooring. I set up my coffee like I'd done 100 times, only this time I was paying attention to every detail like it mattered. Grinding the beans, smelling that rich, bitter scent as it filled the room. Heating the water, watching it steam, pouring it slowly and waiting for the bloom. The smell was the first good thing I'd felt in weeks, maybe months. It made the apartment feel warmer, more human, like it wasn't just a box I was sleeping in. When the coffee was ready, I poured myself a cup and brought it to the table. The mug was hot in my hands. The first sip was exactly what it should be. Dark, smooth, a little bitter in a way that felt honest. And as I turned back for a second sip, there he was. Or it, sitting at my plastic Walmart table as if it had been there the whole time. I don't know how to explain how I recognized him so fast. It wasn't like he had introduced himself. But I knew. Some part of me knew the way you know when a storm is coming, when the air changes before the thunder. Sure, the robe helped. But it wasn't the costume version people joke about. It wasn't some Halloween Grim Reaper with a cheap hood and a plastic scythe. The robe was different. It looked like silk, but darker than anything I'd ever seen, so black it didn't reflect light, like it swallowed it. The fabric draped around him in heavy folds, clean and smooth, like it didn't belong in my apartment. And the figure inside the robe wasn't a skeleton. It was a man. Not young, not old in the normal sense, but worn, like time had passed over him again and again and left marks behind. His face was lined the way a cliff face is lined, carved by 1,000 storms. He had the kind of expression you see on people who have watched too much and stopped reacting. His eyes were fixed on mine, deadpan, steady, not angry, not kind. In that moment, with awe and fear mixing together so fast I couldn't separate them, the only thing I could think to do was ask him if he wanted a cup of coffee. The words came out of my mouth before I could stop them. "Would you like some?" I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't move. He didn't even blink in any way I could notice. He sat there like a statue that had decided to become real. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. The coffee smell suddenly seemed out of place, like I'd lit a candle in a tomb. I waited for him to say something, to tell me I was dreaming, to tell me I was wrong, to tell me anything at all. Nothing. So I poured a second cup anyway. My hands shook a little, but I managed not to spill. I set the mug down near his right hand, close enough that he could reach it if he wanted. Then I sat across from him, facing him the way you face something you can't run from. I took another sip from my own mug, more to have something to do than because I needed it. The coffee tasted the same, but now it felt like I was drinking in front of a judge. Still, he didn't speak. My nerves started itching under my skin. My mind kept trying to fill the silence with explanations. Maybe this was a hallucination. Maybe lack of sleep had finally broken something in me. Maybe I'd lost it completely, and this was how it looked when your brain gives up. But then, there was the weight of him, the feeling that the air had changed. The way my apartment suddenly felt smaller, like his presence was pushing against the walls. I cleared my throat. "You're a little early, aren't you?" I said, forcing a weak smile. "I wasn't planning on seeing you until later today." I even let out a half laugh, the kind you do when you're trying to break tension and all you really do is prove you're scared. I wanted him to stop staring. I wanted him to react. I wanted something human from him. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, slowly, he broke eye contact. His gaze drifted to the kitchen counter, then back to me, then to the living room, then to the bathroom, then to the bedroom, back to me again. It was a simple pattern, almost casual, but the longer he did it, the more I understood what he was looking at. The knives on the counter, the gun in the safe hidden in the living room, tucked away where it couldn't be seen, the pills in the bathroom cabinet. Whatever he thought was in the bedroom, maybe the belt in the closet, maybe the cord on the floor, maybe just the bed itself as a place where a person could decide not to wake up. Again, it hit me like a slap. He wasn't just here because he knew I was going to die. He was asking how. Not with words, but with those calm, scanning eyes, like he was reviewing a menu. The anger came up so fast it surprised me. It was hot and sharp, and it felt good compared to the numbness I'd been living in. It felt like I still had something alive inside me. I pushed back from the table so hard the chair scraped the floor. "If you're going to show up early," I snapped, "and you want to know how I plan on ending all this, you could at least talk to me." He stayed silent, still watching. Something in me broke loose. "You know what?" I said, louder. "I'm not giving you or this hell of a world I live in the satisfaction. I'm going to live. And you showed up here for nothing." I didn't even wait to see if he reacted. I stormed out of the kitchen and down the hall toward the bedroom, my heart pounding. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with the rest of the day. I didn't have a plan for living. I just knew I wasn't going to follow through with dying the way I'd intended. I shoved the bedroom door open, and I stopped. There, on the floor, still tangled in sheets and blankets, was my body. Me, crumpled at a wrong angle, the kind of wrong angle you see in accidents on the highway. My skin looked pale in the weak light. There was a large gash on my head, and blood had pooled and started to thicken, turning dark as it cooled. The mess of blankets looked like a nest around me, like the bed had tried to hold on and failed. For a second, my mind refused to accept it. I stared, waiting for my chest to rise, waiting for my fingers to twitch. Waiting for something to prove this was a nightmare. Nothing moved. Then I felt him behind me. Not a hand on my shoulder, not a touch, just his presence, filling the room the way he had filled the confessional of my life without ever being invited. I couldn't make myself look away from my body. I couldn't turn. I couldn't blink properly. It felt like the room had tilted and my thoughts had spilled out. From behind me, a voice spoke, his voice, but clearer now, closer, finally using words like I demanded. "The stress you were under caused an aneurysm you didn't know you had to burst," he said. His tone wasn't cruel. It wasn't kind. It was factual. like a doctor explaining a result that couldn't be changed. You seized, he continued, and you hit multiple things when you fell out of bed. I swallowed, though I wasn't sure what I was swallowing with. My mouth felt dry anyway. My mind kept trying to go backward, to that moment of falling, to find the point where I could undo it. I could have taken your soul there and then, he said. I heard him shift slightly, as if he were looking around my bedroom the way he'd looked around the apartment. I didn't speak because once I do, our time here is short, he said, and I wanted you to be able to enjoy one last cup. I stood frozen, staring at my dead face, at the blood, at the blankets, twisted around limbs that would never untangle themselves. A strange, stupid thought rose up through the horror. My coffee. The mug on the table. The second cup sitting by his hand. Then he added, almost casually, like a final detail, in a conversation that had always been inevitable. If it's any consolation, he said, you really do make a great coffee. And in that moment, in the cold space between my body on the floor and the thing behind me that had been waiting with patient eyes, I realized the cruelest part wasn't that I'd died. It was that I'd finally decided to live a few seconds too late. Story 5. People always say the devil is beautiful, like evil has to be charming, because if it looked ugly from the start, no one would go near it. He was beautiful. So was his father. And as sick as it makes me to admit it, some rotten part of me still misses that man. Not because he was good to me. He never was. I miss him the way you miss a fever once it breaks, because at least you knew what was happening while you were burning. At least the pain had a shape. At least it was familiar. He would come home from work and scream at me until his voice went rough and he ran out of anger. Sometimes he'd punch holes through the drywall we couldn't afford to repair, and afterward he'd stand there breathing hard, staring at the damage like it was my fault for, setting him off. He'd tell me if I hadn't said what I said, if I hadn't looked at him that way, if I hadn't pushed him, he wouldn't have had to do it. I learned to apologize for things I didn't understand. I learned to keep my voice soft. I learned to hold my face still, like any expression might be the wrong one. He was the kind of man you end up with after you've already been through something bad and you've started to believe you deserve more bad. The kind you meet at a bar after another horrible relationship, when you hate the world and you hate yourself even more. When you're 8 drinks deep and everyone's face is a blurry smear, and you can't tell danger from charm anymore. When you're too drunk to care, and every word out of a stranger's mouth sounds exactly like what you've been begging to hear. When I met him, I told myself I'd been blessed, that he was the solution, that I was lucky, that I had to be grateful. I repeated that lie for 2 years while he slowly became scarier and scarier, while my fear became routine and my self-respect turned into something I couldn't even remember how. To feel. Even when I hated myself more than I hated him, I still told myself we could fix it. That love was work. That commitment meant staying. That if I could just be better, quieter, gentler, easier, he would soften again. So when I found out I was pregnant, I thought in my delusion that God had finally sent me the answer. A baby. How cliché. Of course I believed it would fix everything. Of course I thought this was a gift meant to turn our mess into a family. I was naive enough to think a child could heal what violence had already poisoned. And I clung to that idea because the alternative was admitting I had wasted years of my life on someone who didn't love me. I remember being careful when I told him, like the way you approach a dog that bites. I practiced the words in my head. I imagined his face lighting up. I imagined him hugging me. I imagined him saying, "We'll do better now." I tried not to think too hard about how the baby had been conceived. I tried not to put a name to it. I told myself it had been passion, even though I knew it was the night he came home drunk and forced himself on me. I told myself it had to mean something, that it had to be the turning point. He didn't smile. He didn't even look surprised. He told me to abort it. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. It wasn't what I expected. It didn't fit the story I'd been feeding myself. I told him I couldn't. I said it was against God's word. I said it like it was a shield. He hated that answer. He added a few fresh holes to the walls with his fists, swearing at me between blows, then stormed out of the apartment. I assumed he was headed to the bar, because that's where he always went when he wanted to punish me without leaving marks on my skin. He came back later, drunk, and suddenly he was supportive. Suddenly he spoke softly, even sweetly, and for a moment I almost believed him. He was always a different person when he drank. Sometimes the alcohol brought back the man I thought I'd met, the one who acted like I was precious. Other times it turned his love into something furious and ugly, like he needed to break things to prove he existed. Looking back, I don't know which version was worse. I should have known where it was going. I should have seen the pattern forming, the way the ground always shifted under me, no matter how carefully I stepped. 7 months in, after months of acting like he was coming around, after months of touching my stomach and talking about names, after months of telling me I was doing great, he disappeared. He sent me out to the shops. It was nothing special. He asked for a few groceries, kissed my forehead, told me to be quick. Another little scene of normal life, the kind I craved so badly I didn't notice how staged it felt. When I came home, the apartment was empty. Not empty like he went for a walk, empty like he had never lived there. I stood in the doorway with plastic bags cutting into my fingers, listening to the silence, trying to understand what I was seeing. At first I told myself he'd just gone to the bar without mentioning it, like he often did. So I waited. I paced. I sat on the couch with my heart pounding for hours, watching the light change through the window like it was a clock, counting down to relief. Night came. Still nothing. I went to the bedroom to change into pajamas and opened the closet. All his clothes were gone. That moment didn't feel real. It felt like a prank, like any second he would step out and laugh. But then I started noticing everything. His shoes missing from their spot, his keys gone, his wallet, his bag. The little things you don't think about until they're not there. I slid down onto the kitchen floor and cried until I couldn't breathe. I cried because I'd been abandoned again, and because I knew I'd helped it happen by believing the wrong things for too long. I cried because I had quit my job only a month earlier, his suggestion, of course, because he liked me dependent, and now I had nothing. No money, no stability, no partner, no plan. For a while, I thought about ending the pregnancy. Not out of hatred for the baby. Not then. Out of panic. Out of survival. But it was too late for a legal abortion anyway, and even if it hadn't been, I told myself it was a sin. I told myself God would punish me. Sometimes now, I wonder if God would have forgiven me, or if he would have understood, or if he would have applauded me for stopping what I was about to bring into the world. After his father left, the baby kicked constantly. People say kicks are comforting. They say it feels like life, like connection. For me, it felt like violence practiced from the inside. He used my ribs and my organs like a punching bag. It hurt all the time, sharp and deep, like he was trying to claw his way out early. By the time I went into labor, part of me felt relieved. At least the pain would change into a pain everyone understood. At least it would be over. I got rushed to the hospital, shaking more from fear than contractions. I was physically ready to give birth, but emotionally I felt like I had no ground under me. The first thing I did when we got through the doors was ask if Dad was on the way, if he'd been contacted, if he would show up. Even now, that question makes me sick. Not because I wanted him there. I didn't. But because my brain had been trained to look for him like he was the answer to every emergency, even the ones he created. And the staff, with those careful hospital faces, had to remind me he wasn't coming. Then came the epidural. They missed. Then they missed again. Then again. The needle sliding in, wrong, then right, wrong, then right. I remember the sound of my own breathing, fast and thin. I remember gripping the bed rails so hard my fingers went numb. They finally got it, and the numbness spread like a cold tide. Sometimes, even now, I can still feel that needle going into my spine. Not pain exactly. Memory turned physical. People say birth is supposed to be straightforward. Terrible, yes, but standard. Hospitals do it every day. Even if you don't know what you're doing, the people around you do. Of course, it wasn't like that for me. At some point, I heard someone say decel. I didn't know what it meant. I heard it again, sharper this time, and I realized it was about the baby's heart rate dropping. People moved faster. The room filled. Hands pushed on my stomach, checked monitors, adjusted things. I lay there on my back, unable to move, staring at the ceiling while strangers handled my body like a problem to solve. They were gentle with me, in that professional way. They tried to keep my voice calm, tried to explain just enough. But none of them promised I would be okay. None of them promised he would be okay. Then, without warning, the heartbeat disappeared. Not lowered, not slowed, gone. The room snapped into a different kind of urgency. They rushed me out through bright hallways into an operating room. Someone told me I needed an emergency C-section. I tried to object. I tried to ask questions. I tried to say I didn't want it. It didn't matter. They held me down. They cut me open. I felt pressure, tugging, a strange movement inside my body that didn't feel like my body anymore. They pulled him out. He was covered in blood. He didn't move. For a second, I thought the universe had finally stepped in to prevent what I had been too weak to prevent myself. I thought maybe God had decided, last minute, to spare everyone. Then, I saw what had happened. The umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck, tight like a noose made of flesh. It had cut off blood flow. It had choked him the moment he reached for air. The staff moved quickly, cutting and unwrapping, rubbing him, clearing his airway, doing everything they could to pull him back into motion. Air finally filled his lungs. He lived, but he didn't cry. Not the way babies cry when they're born. Not that first shocked wail people talk about. He just opened his mouth and breathed, quiet and steady, like crying was something he didn't need. The doctor checked him, then wrapped him in a blanket and handed him to me, smiling as if the nightmare had ended. The doctor said I must be proud he made it through. The doctor called it a miracle. I held him and looked down at his face, waiting for the rush of love people promised me would arrive like a chemical wave. He opened his eyes for the first time. They were his father's eyes. I hated them immediately. The hatred frightened me, because I knew what it meant to hate a baby. I knew what it would make people think of me. I knew it wasn't allowed. I spent the next few days letting the nurses do most of the care. I pretended I was weak from surgery, which wasn't completely untrue, but I leaned into it because I didn't want anyone watching me hold him and noticing what wasn't there. They would have seen the stiffness in my arms, the way I kept him at a careful distance, the way my face didn't soften. He had already cost me more money than I could afford. He had taken more from me than I had to give, and some part of me believed he had done it on purpose, like he had arrived with intention. Like hurting me was the first thing he learned. He was born with a tooth. When it came time to nurse, everyone told me it would be bonding. They said my body would release chemicals that made me love him more, that made us connect. They said it like it was science, like it couldn't fail. He bit me, every time, not by accident, not a confused latch. He clamped down hard enough to make me see white behind my eyes, and he held on as if he was testing how much pain I could take. I tried to breathe through it. I tried to tell myself it was normal, but it felt deliberate. I bought a breast pump as soon as I could, charged it to my credit card, and told myself I'd worry about the debt later. I didn't plan to pay it back. I didn't plan for anything. I was in survival mode. The nurses adored him. They'd lift him and coo at him, and he would stare up at them with those big eyes, calm and interested. He looked like an angel in their arms. They called him sweet. They called him beautiful. They told me I was lucky. But if I touched him, he screamed. If I held him, he screamed like I was hurting him. If I tried to rock him, he screamed. If I tried to soothe him, he screamed. He didn't just cry, he acted like my hands were wrong, like my presence was poison. I understood the message quickly. Everyone else could have him. I couldn't. When we finally went home, I bought a baby monitor with a screen. Not because I was worried about him, but because I was worried about myself. I wanted to know what he was doing. I wanted proof of what I felt. I wanted to catch him in whatever game he was playing. He loved the crib. He didn't want to leave it. He slept in it. He ate in it. He got changed in it. Everything happened there because that was the only place he seemed content. I think he knew the crib was the last thing his father ever did for me. The bar, on the right side, was bent. His father had bent it while building it, during one of his rages after throwing something at me. It had happened the day before he left. I remember staring at the dented metal and thinking it was a bad omen, then forcing myself to ignore it, because ignoring things was what I did best. At 5 months old, my son could pull himself up on that bar. Always the same place, always the right side, always gripping the bend like it belonged to him. He would stand there and hold it, staring into nothing, looking satisfied. The baby monitor messed with me almost immediately. Every night around 3 a.m., the speaker would suddenly blast crying. Loud, urgent, the kind that makes your bones wake up. I would jerk upright and grab the monitor, heart racing, and look at the screen. He'd be asleep, completely still, chest rising and falling. No tears, no movement. At first, I thought the monitor was glitching. Then I thought maybe it was picking up another baby's signal, another apartment's device. But it happened too often, too exactly, like a schedule. And even when I knew it was fake, my body couldn't ignore it. My instincts didn't care what my mind believed. Crying is a hook in a mother's brain. It pulls you up, drags you toward the sound. Sometimes I'd wake to crying and see him standing in the crib, gripping that same bent bar, staring straight into the camera. Not blinking, not moving, just watching. The first time I went into his room, I did it fast, ready to scoop him up and stop whatever was happening. He slowly turned his head away from the monitor and toward me, still silent, still staring. It felt like being seen by something that didn't need light. After that, I stopped going in. I would sit in bed with the monitor in my hands, staring at the screen until the crying sound stopped, telling myself the door between us was enough. Telling myself I was safe as long as I didn't get close. One night I heard a man's voice through the monitor. Adult. Low. Too quiet to understand words, but clear enough to recognize it was a male voice speaking close to the microphone. It scared me so badly, I felt sick. The next morning, I strapped him into his stroller and took him to church. His baptism wasn't scheduled for weeks, but I couldn't wait. I didn't know what else to do. I needed help, advice, something bigger than me to confirm I wasn't imagining it. I hadn't been attending church regularly since he was born. I'd never brought him before. The moment we stepped inside, he started screaming. Not normal crying. Screaming like he was being burned. He twisted against the straps until his face turned red and blotchy. He screamed through the entire service, loud enough that people kept turning around, some with irritation, some with sympathy. He didn't stop until the very end, when he finally wore himself out and passed out. I waited for the service to finish, then approached the priest and asked if we could talk. I knew I would sound unstable. I was counting on the idea that faith made room for strange things. I thought if anyone might believe me, it would be him. He didn't. Not at first. He tried to hold my son, maybe to show me I was just overwhelmed, but the second the priest's arms closed around him, my son erupted again, screaming and writhing like he was in pain. The priest tried to rock him, shush him softly, soothe him the way priests soothe grieving people. It only made the screaming worse. Eventually, he set him back into the stroller, smoothed his robe, and looked at me with careful concern. I told him something was wrong. I told him everything felt off. I told him the story from the beginning, from the abuse, from the conception, from the father leaving, from the birth, the noose of cord around my baby's neck, the lack of crying, the way he reacted to me, the baby monitor, the voice. The priest listened without judging me, at least not openly. His face didn't twist into disgust. He didn't interrupt. He looked thoughtful, like he was turning each piece over and examining it. Then he suggested, gently, that grief and exhaustion could make patterns look like signs, that I might be interpreting normal things through fear, that he didn't see anything truly out of the ordinary, even though he sympathized with what I'd been through. But I begged him. I said I believed it was something darker. I asked for a baptism right then. Not in a week. Not with ceremony. Just done. I needed it done like medicine. He hesitated, then agreed. I asked for full immersion. The priest said he normally didn't do immersion for infants. I told him I wanted to be sure. I wanted every inch of my son blessed. I said it like I knew what I was talking about, like I had authority. After a while, he agreed. He prepared the space. I waited, tight with hope and dread. I stripped my son down and handed him over. The priest spoke a few prayers and carefully dipped him into the holy water. My son came up screaming. The priest looked startled. I told him it was normal, that he always did that, and the priest continued. More prayers, more words meant to sanctify, more rituals meant to protect. Then it was done, and I thanked him and wheeled my son back out, his screaming following us like a siren. He screamed all the way home. He screamed through the night, stopping only when he passed out from exhaustion, waking again to start over. It was relentless, like something inside him was furious. By the next morning, I was so tired that my fear became blurry. And then I saw his skin. He looked awful. Red, inflamed, angry. His skin was peeling, weeping fluid, soaking through his clothes. It looked like his body couldn't contain itself. It didn't hit me until we were sitting in a clinic waiting room that the change had started after the baptism, after the holy water. I sat there in a plastic chair under bad lighting, holding a baby who looked like he was rotting, and I realized my worst suspicion might be true. When the doctor finally saw us, I didn't say what I was thinking. I didn't say, I think holy water did this. I didn't say, I think my baby is wrong. I didn't want to be labeled insane. I didn't want pills. I didn't want locked doors and yellow walls. I wanted someone to fix this without making me the problem. The doctor said it looked like an allergic reaction, eczema, likely triggered by something in the water. He prescribed ointment and told me to come back if it worsened. I nodded and paid and told myself I wouldn't return no matter what. I couldn't afford repeat visits. And even more than money, I couldn't afford questions. His skin eventually cleared. My fear didn't. I asked a friend to watch him for a day, just to give me a break. She was eager. Like everyone else, she loved him for reasons I couldn't understand. She told me she'd basically raised her younger brothers and knew babies well. I didn't care about her qualifications. I cared about silence. I cared about being alone in my own head for a few hours without crying cutting through me. I went for a walk, hoping fresh air would clear my thoughts. It didn't. It made them louder. I found myself wondering if I was the one who was wrong, if I had poisoned everything by hating his father, by resenting the baby, by being closed off before he was born. I had wanted a family my whole life, the way some people want a home. I had pictured it like safety, warmth, belonging. Instead, I was broke, alone, and scared of my own child. I realized I had given up on hope a long time ago, and I didn't even remember when it happened. So I decided I would try again. I told myself I would force connection. I would fix whatever was broken in me. I would be the mother I was supposed to be. When I got home, my friend looked cheerful and relaxed. She told me he'd been a dream while I was gone. No crying, no problems, smiling even. She said it like she expected me to be grateful. The moment I stepped inside, he started crying. Not soft crying. The familiar sharp sound like accusation. My friend left, and I shut the door, alone again with him in the noise. I picked him up and held him for hours. I rocked him. I talked to him. I tried to soothe him until my arms ached. Nothing changed. I tried nursing again, grimacing through the pain, telling myself to endure it like penance. He bit me. I nearly screamed. He kept crying. That night I put him in bed with me. I lay beside him, desperate for anything that felt like bonding. I needed him to stop feeling like an enemy in my house. He cried until both of us passed out from exhaustion. And then I dreamed. I'm not a dreamer. I haven't had a real dream since I was 15, back when I was still hopeful and the future didn't feel like a closed door. But this was different from anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't a story my brain made up. It was like being forced to watch something true. For a moment, I was all-seeing. That's the only phrase that fits. In one flash, I saw my life and his life like timelines unfolding at once. I saw the night he was conceived. I saw the day his father walked out. I saw myself alone on nights when the baby kicked and twisted inside me while I cried, begging for it to end. I saw the birth. I saw his body pulled out of me, still and silent. I saw them cutting the cord from his neck and calling it a miracle. Then I saw him older, fully grown, not close to me, not loving me, barely in my life except as pain. I saw every time he screamed at me that he hated me, every time he ran away into the night and I had to search for him in a gown with a flashlight, calling his name until my throat hurt. I saw how he would hide from me like I was the danger. Then I saw him die. He killed himself. He abandoned his family the way his father abandoned us. People would call it depression. People would say he hated himself. But in the dream, I saw what came after, and I knew they were wrong. He left because he had something better waiting. I saw him in a world made of smog, a red sky, no sun. A city of rotted buildings stacked and buckled under the weight of bodies and debris. Everything was shadowed by a tower that rose like a needle into the poisoned air. At the top of it, he sat on a throne. He wasn't a victim. He wasn't lost. He was in his place. He searched for those he wanted to destroy, and below him, creatures lived under the tower in darkness, suffering in endless filth. He fed on it. He lived for it, the way he had lived for my suffering. In the dream, I was drowning in an ocean of decaying flesh, pulled under by the weight of it, and he looked down at me without smiling. The way he looked down at me was exactly the way he stared into the baby monitor camera. The same calm, unblinking focus. As I took my last breath in the dream and let myself sink, I felt a stab of grief, not for myself, but for the fact that the last thing I would ever see was his eyes. I woke up at 3 a.m. My eyelids fluttered open, and I felt like I'd been slapped from one nightmare into another. My son was beside me. He was gripping my finger tightly in his small hand. His eyes were open. He was sleeping the way he always slept, eyes open, staring. Those eyes, his father's eyes, fixed on me even in rest. I watched him the way a gazelle watches a lion, careful not to move too fast, careful not to make myself interesting. Slowly, I slipped my finger from his grip and slid out from under the sheets. I told myself my mind was made up. I kept repeating it, like repetition could turn shaking hands into certainty. I paced the kitchen for hours, whispering through the reasons. I listed the signs. I replayed the dream. I told myself again and again that even if no one agreed, I would be doing the world a favor. When the sun began to rise, light spilling into the kitchen and onto the table where I leaned with my head in my hands, my thoughts shifted from whether to how. It isn't hard, I realized, to kill someone in the modern world if you don't care how it looks. Bodies are fragile. A short fall downstairs can snap a neck. Heat, cold, water, sickness, nature takes lives every day. The human body can survive incredible things, but it can also fail fast, without warning. Still, I wanted to be humane. If he was born a monster, it wasn't my job to punish him. That was for God. I told myself I wasn't acting out of cruelty. I told myself I was stopping what he would become. A knife seemed easy, gravity too, but both felt brutal in a way I couldn't stomach. I had heard drowning could be peaceful, that right before death there could be a moment of calm, even bliss. So I went to the bathroom and filled the tub. When I returned to the bedroom, he was curled on the corner of my mattress, snoring softly, like any baby. For a second, the sight almost broke me. Almost. He woke when I lifted him. He turned his round head and looked up at me with those oversized hazel eyes, calm and watchful. He didn't cry. He didn't fight. He only stared, as if he understood exactly what was happening and found it interesting. I carried him to the bathroom without speaking. He stayed quiet as I lowered him into the water, right up until the moment I pressed his back down to the bottom of the tub. I didn't slam him. I didn't thrash. I held him there with my hand on his chest, just enough pressure to keep him under. Bubbles rose. Then fewer. Then none. I waited a moment longer, just to be sure. When I finally let go, I didn't cry. I thought I would, but my body felt hollow, like crying required something I no longer had. I pulled the plug. I closed the bathroom door. I left what was left of my son in the tub like a problem I had set down. Only then did it hit me how little I had planned. Where would I put him? What would I say? How would I hide the body? How would I explain anything? Panic came late, slow and thick, because my brain had been running on one straight track and had never bothered to look beyond it. I didn't move him. Days passed. The smell grew until it filled the apartment, pushing through the door, clinging to everything. I avoided the bathroom, but the stink didn't stay contained. It became a presence. It became a punishment. Every day I told myself I would deal with it tomorrow, and every day I pretended it wasn't there until it was impossible to pretend. In the end, the neighbors complained. The building manager came. Then, the police. They found him. The manager called me a monster. The police called me a monster. The judge called me a monster. I nodded and let them say it. There was no point arguing with people who lived in the world where this was simple. Deep down, I still believe I saved them. I believe I saved all of us. They told me I was insane and locked me away in a building full of people who mutter to themselves and stare at walls. No one believed what I said. Not really. Not the part about what he was, or what I saw, or what was waiting. But I don't mind it here as much as I thought I would. I live alone now, in a small room. It's quiet. No baby monitor. No screaming at 3 a.m. No eyes watching me from the dark. I see a doctor every week. He's kind in the careful way kind people are when they're paid to be. He nods at the right times. He asks questions like he wants to understand. Sometimes I think he half believes me. Or maybe he just understands that belief doesn't matter here. He told me he doesn't think I'm crazy, not like people think. Then he turned around and gave me a diagnosis anyway, a label with a neat medical name that fits like a straitjacket. He also fought for me to be classified as non-violent. He said I was not a danger in here, that good behavior mattered, that I could earn small freedoms. Because of that, I have a phone again. I got it yesterday. It helps with the boredom. It gives my hands something to do, something that feels like mine. It gives me a place to put the truth where someone might find it. People love telling you what is and isn't real. They love deciding what you're allowed to know about your own life. They say memory is unreliable. They say trauma twists perception. They say dreams are just dreams. But I know what I saw. And whether anyone believes me or not, that doesn't change the one thing I'm sure of. Only I know what's true. Only I do.